Berlin at night was not a city of peace. It was a place where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, where every flickering streetlight looked like a warning, and where the rain never felt like cleansing but punishment. The storm that rolled over the city that night was merciless, sheets of icy rain slamming against windows, rattling rooftops, and flooding narrow alleys with dirty water. In the heart of this storm walked Lukas Reinhardt, his steps uneven, his body bent as though the weight of the sky itself pressed against him. His coat was soaked through, clinging to his frame, but he did not notice. His mind was too loud, too chaotic, too broken to care about the cold biting into his skin. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, wild and restless, scanning corners as if enemies lurked just beyond sight. His breath came in sharp bursts, fogging in the frigid air, and his hands twitched by his sides, curling into fists as though he were preparing to fight an invisible opponent. In truth, Lukas was not walking the streets of Berlin at all, he was walking a battlefield buried deep within his memories. With every flash of lightning, he saw gunfire. With every clap of thunder, he heard explosions. The ghosts of war trailed behind him, whispering, screaming, laughing. Faces of comrades fallen too soon flickered before his eyes, their blood mixing with the rain, their voices accusing him, blaming him, breaking him. He pressed his palms to his temples, staggering into the mouth of a dark alley, hoping to silence the chaos inside. But the more he fought the voices, the louder they grew. Failure, they hissed. Pawn. His knees buckled, and he slumped against the cold brick wall, sliding down until he was sitting in the filth of the alley, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a long moment, he wished it would all end there. That the storm would drown him, wash away the nightmare of his existence, erase him from a world that had already forgotten his name. But Lukas was not an ordinary broken man. Beneath the fractured mind, beneath the scars carved into his soul, lived a secret, one the world could never know. Years ago, his mind had been turned into a weapon by a secret program known only as Mindplay. What no one else could see was that even now, even as he crouched broken in the rain, invisible strings tugged at his thoughts, pulling him deeper into a nightmare he had never chosen. Somewhere out there, hidden eyes still watched him, waiting for the moment he would break completely. The storm raged above, lightning tearing through the sky, and Lukas whispered a soundless prayer to a god he no longer believed in. Somewhere inside his fractured mind, beneath the voices and the ghosts, a flicker of resistance burned. He was not ready to give in, not yet. Friends, if this story touches your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more heartfelt tales. Long before Lukas found himself wandering through storm-soaked streets, he had been someone different, someone feared, admired, and envied in equal measure. In his youth, he had been an exceptional soldier, disciplined and sharp, driven by an unshakable belief in duty. Yet beneath the polished uniform and unwavering salutes, Lukas carried scars invisible to the eye. He had watched comrades fall beside him, heard the desperate last breaths of brothers in arms, and lived with the guilt of surviving when others did not. For him, war was not just a matter of victory or defeat, it was a wound that never stopped bleeding. It was during this time, when his soul was weighed down by loss, that the offer came. The government's secret program, Mindplay, promised salvation. They told him his pain could be transformed into purpose, that his memories could be sharpened into tools, that his grief could be used to end wars before they began. They called it the evolution of the soldier. Lukas, desperate to make meaning out of his suffering, desperate to stop the cycle of death, agreed. The transformation was unlike anything the world had seen. Electrodes were fused into his neural network, nanotechnology coursed through his brain, and his very thoughts were rewired. At first, the results were astonishing. Lukas became the perfect strategist. He could anticipate enemy maneuvers as though he had read their minds. Entire battles were won before they began because Lukas could see patterns no ordinary human brain could grasp. He was hailed as a genius, a savior, the pride of Germany's military brilliance. His name echoed in secret corridors of power as a legend, a weapon too valuable to ever lose. But victory came at a cost far greater than anyone had warned him. The implants that sharpened his brilliance also amplified his nightmares. His memories of the battlefield did not fade, they grew sharper, more vivid, more unbearable. The screams of dying men rang louder in his head, the smell of blood clung to his nostrils, and his mind became a prison where ghosts never slept. And then came the blackouts. At first, they lasted minutes, then hours. When he awoke, his body bore signs of violence: bruised knuckles, cuts on his skin, mud on his boots, as though he had been somewhere, doing something, without ever knowing where or why. Lukas soon realized the truth that chilled him to the bone: Mindplay had never let him go. Even after he left the military, even when he tried to bury himself in the quiet life of repairing broken machines in a dusty workshop, the program still controlled him. He was not just haunted by his past, he was still their puppet. His body moved when they demanded, his hands carried out missions his conscious mind never remembered, and his guilt grew with every lost hour. The man once celebrated as a hero now lived as a prisoner inside his own skull. Every waking day was a battle against the invisible chains of a program that had turned him from soldier to experiment. And deep down, Lukas feared the worst: that he had already taken lives in these lost blackouts, and that more blood was on his hands than he would ever know. Amid the torment and endless nights of fear, Lukas found an anchor in the unlikeliest of places: a woman named Elena. She was nothing like the soldiers, scientists, or commanders who had shaped the battlefield of his life. Elena was a psychologist, but more than that, she was a listener. She had worked for years with men broken by war, those who had returned home carrying invisible scars that society chose not to see. When she first met Lukas, she did not see the haunted eyes or the trembling hands as signs of weakness. She saw a man still fighting, even if the enemy was now inside his own mind. Their sessions began quietly, in a small office tucked away in a corner of Berlin where the world outside could not intrude. Lukas would sit rigidly on the edge of a chair, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands restless, his breath shallow. For weeks, he said little. Silence weighed heavily between them, yet Elena never rushed him, never filled the emptiness with meaningless words. She simply waited, her presence calm, steady, and unthreatening. And then one day, the silence cracked. Lukas spoke, not about the experiments, not about the blackouts, but about the nightmares that came to him every night. He told her of fire, of screams, of men calling his name before being swallowed by the chaos. His voice trembled, his fists clenched, but for the first time in years, he let the pain spill into the open. Elena did not flinch. She did not recoil or look at him with pity. Instead, she reminded him that nightmares were not signs of weakness but signs of wounds, wounds that could, in time, begin to heal. She taught him breathing techniques to calm the storms in his chest, grounding methods to remind him of the present when hallucinations blurred reality. Slowly, Lukas found moments where he could hold on to himself. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he was not beyond saving. Yet it was not the exercises or the science of psychology that gave him hope. It was Elena herself, her compassion, her refusal to see him as an experiment, her belief that he was still a man worthy of peace. When his hands shook uncontrollably, she held them without hesitation. When guilt poured from him in heavy sobs, she sat beside him, her silence louder than words. She believed in kindness, in the idea that broken souls did not need to be discarded but embraced. But even as Lukas began to trust her, fear gnawed at him. He worried that the blackouts could return at any moment, that he could hurt her without even knowing it. He told himself to push her away, to protect her from the danger he carried. And yet, every time he looked into her eyes, every time he felt the warmth of her quiet strength, something inside him refused. For the first time in years, he had something to fight for that wasn't about orders, missions, or duty. He had a fragile light in his darkness, a chance at humanity. Unseen to both of them, however, shadows lingered. The program still watched, still considered Lukas their most valuable asset. And now, they knew he had found a weakness. To them, Elena was not hope. She was leverage. It happened on an ordinary evening, when the world outside seemed calm, but inside Lukas, a storm was waiting to break. He was in his workshop, the one place he felt a fragile sense of control. The smell of oil and rusted metal clung to the air, shelves stacked with broken radios and old machines that he repaired as if fixing them might one day teach him how to fix himself. He had been working late, the dim bulb above flickering against the gathering darkness, when the first wave struck. A sharp pain ripped through his skull, so sudden and brutal that he collapsed to his knees. His vision blurred, his breathing fractured, and his body convulsed as if invisible chains were pulling him apart. The blackouts had always been terrifying, but this one was worse, heavier, as though his mind was being forced open. Images flooded in, not of the past this time, but of something yet to come. He saw streets burning, crowds rioting, soldiers turning on civilians. He heard screams echoing across cities, and he saw himself, his own hands carrying out acts he could not bear to imagine. His consciousness split into fragments, scattering across time and memory, until he could no longer tell where the hallucination ended and where reality began. When the storm inside his head finally eased, Lukas found himself sprawled on the floor, his body drenched in sweat, his hands smeared with black ink. At first, he thought it was another hallucination. But when he forced himself upright, he saw the floorboards covered in frantic scribbles, symbols and codes drawn by his own hand. Panic clawed at him as he tried to understand, piecing together the fragments like shards of glass. Then it hit him with brutal clarity: the codes were instructions, planted deep within his subconscious, waiting to be triggered. He realized the unthinkable truth: Mindplay had never ended. The program had buried commands inside him, invisible traps ready to activate. Worse still, the hallucinations had revealed their ultimate plan. The implants in his brain were not just tools for calculation, they were keys in a much larger network, a hive mind linking soldiers like him together. If activated, it would not only control him but weaponize thousands, maybe millions, bending their thoughts, their will, and their humanity into instruments of chaos. Wars would not need armies, entire populations could be turned into weapons with a single command. Lukas fell back against the wall, the weight of it crushing him. His entire body shook as guilt and rage collided inside. He had been a pawn, not just in battles past, but in a war that had yet to begin. The blood that might be spilled would not just be on the hands of the program, it would be on his too, because he was the key to unleashing it all. For a moment, despair nearly broke him. He thought of ending it there, of finding a way to silence his mind forever so he could never be used again. But then, through the haze of fear, he remembered Elena. Her calm voice, her unshakable belief that he was more than what they made him. In that memory, Lukas found something stronger than despair: resolve. That night, drenched in sweat and fear, Lukas made his choice. He would not run anymore. He would not surrender his mind to their strings. If the program wanted to use him as their weapon, he would turn himself into their undoing. Even if it cost him his life, he would fight to destroy Mindplay once and for all. The facility stood like a fortress in the dead of night, its steel walls rising against the horizon, guarded by shadows and silence. To the world outside, it was just another abandoned complex, forgotten and lifeless. But Lukas knew better. Behind those walls thrummed the heartbeat of Mindplay, the monstrous creation that had stolen his life and now threatened to consume countless others. Rain lashed against the barbed wire as Lukas approached, his body battered but his will unbroken. Every step toward the entrance was a war inside his head. The voices screamed, the hallucinations surged, but he pressed forward. He was not just fighting a building, he was fighting the part of himself they had tried to own. Inside, the corridors pulsed with cold fluorescent light. Lukas's senses betrayed him at every turn. The program flooded his vision with illusions, projecting soldiers blocking his way, the twisted faces of fallen comrades, even images of Elena begging him to turn back. His hands trembled, his pulse thundered, but he forced himself to see past the lies. He had lived with hallucinations for years, now, he would use them. Each phantom became a test, and each step he took was an act of defiance. For every false soldier that appeared, Lukas imagined them falling, and the vision dissolved into nothingness. He no longer cowered from the ghosts, they fueled him. At the heart of the facility, Lukas found the control chamber, a place alive with machines humming like predators. Screens flickered with data, lines of code streaming faster than the eye could follow. And there, standing in the glow, was the architect of it all, the lead scientist, the man who had once called Lukas his masterpiece. The hive mind was already activating, voices clawing at Lukas's skull as his implants surged with unbearable pressure. For a moment, he staggered, his body betraying him, his consciousness splintering into pieces. He felt himself slipping into the very weapon they intended, his free will cracking under the weight of the command. But in that final moment, Lukas reached for the one thing Mindplay could not control: his humanity. He remembered Elena's steady gaze, her unwavering belief that he was more than a pawn. He clung to that memory like a lifeline, channeling it into raw defiance. With every ounce of strength left, Lukas turned the system inward, forcing the hive mind to collapse upon itself. Sparks erupted, alarms wailed, and the facility trembled as the network consumed its own core. When the smoke cleared, Lukas staggered from the wreckage. His body was broken, his mind scarred, but his soul was free. Dawn broke over Berlin, painting the sky with pale light. The storm had passed. To the world, he would remain a nameless veteran, a forgotten shadow on the streets. But within, he carried the triumph of a man who had reclaimed his humanity against impossible odds. Lukas had survived the dangerous Mindplay, not as their weapon, but as his own man. If this story moved you, please share it, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories of love, redemption, and hope.